The young and the restless spoilers, the cold steel of the handcuffs dug into Nick's wrists as the cell door slammed shut behind him with a finality that echoed through his bones far louder than the metallic clang itself. His chest heaved with a fury he couldn't contain, his muscles tight from adrenaline and disbelief. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been a free man, sitting at home, scrolling through messages, sipping lukewarm coffee, and now, he was locked away. Branded a murderer, of all things. The absurdity of the accusation would have almost been comical if it weren't so terrifying. Damien was dead. Murdered. But Nick hadn't even seen the man in days, hadn't exchanged more than a passing glance with him in recent weeks. Yet, here he was, the number one suspect, because someone had deliberately planted a bloody knife and a pair of latex gloves in his bedroom drawer, tucked neatly beneath a stack of t-shirts. Not in the kitchen, not in the garage. His bedroom. A place only someone intimately familiar with the layout of his home would know how to navigate. That alone should have raised red flags. That alone should have exonerated him. But instead, it became the foundation of the case against him. Chance had been the one to bring him in, and while there was no denying the tension that had always simmered between them, Nick never expected it would come to this. Chance looked him in the eye and read him his rights with such mechanical precision, it felt rehearsed, as if he'd been waiting for the opportunity. The way he avoided looking at Nick after discovering the evidence said more than any words could. Nick knew that look. It was the look of a man trying to quiet the voice of doubt in his own head. He was doing his job, but deep down, he wasn't convinced. Yet still, he proceeded. That hurt more than the cuffs. That hurt more than being thrown behind bars. The worst part wasn't even being accused. It wasn't even the horror of realizing someone was orchestrating this with such precision that they knew exactly where to plant evidence, exactly how to manipulate the narrative, and exactly how to stay just far enough in the shadows. No, the worst part was Lily. Her silence. Her eyes. The way she looked at him when she came to the station. Not with rage, not with tears, but with that devastating void. The absence of belief. She thought he did it. She believed the evidence. The same woman who had once fought the world at his side now refused to stand beside him. That, more than anything, made the walls of his cell feel like they were closing in. Nick wasn't just imprisoned by bars. He was imprisoned by betrayal, by doubt, by the collapsing trust of people he once thought would never question his integrity. Michael tried to console him. As his lawyer and longtime friend, Michael insisted on strategy, on keeping emotions in check, on trusting the system. This is a setup, Michael had said, his tone calm but clipped. Someone wants you out of the picture. My job is to make sure that doesn't happen. But Nick couldn't be calmed. He wasn't wired to sit quietly while his world crumbled. And even though Michael promised to launch his own private investigation alongside the legal defense, Nick felt like every second wasted behind these walls was another inch the real killer used to get away. He slammed his fists against the wall more than once that night. He screamed. He paced. The guards threatened solitary. He didn't care. He was innocent, and the world was crumbling too fast to stop. Then, the darkness deepened. It happened just past midnight. The hallway light flickered. Footsteps, light, deliberate, echoed against the sterile tiles of the corridor leading to his cell. Nick stood still, breath shallow, hands curled into fists. He wasn't expecting visitors. The footsteps stopped, and through the small slit in the door, a figure appeared. A man, average height, lean, cloaked in black, stood silently. A cap pulled low over his face, a mask covering everything below the eyes. But it was the eyes that hit Nick like a fist to the gut. The way they gleamed, almost smug, a hint of a smirk radiating through them. Those weren't the eyes of a stranger. Nick didn't know how he knew, but he knew. That was the man who had set him up. That was the man who had killed Damien. And he was here now, standing on the other side of the bars, as if mocking the entire system. As if daring Nick to stop him. Before Nick could shout, before he could even fully register the shock, the man tilted his head just slightly, and then walked away. Not rushed. Not afraid. Calm. Controlled. Gone. By the time the guards responded to Nick's screaming, he was already a ghost. A shadow. A phantom leaving behind only questions and the echo of a cruel smile. Nick tried to tell Chance, but it was like screaming into the wind. Chance listened, of course. He always listened. Nodded. Wrote something in his notebook. Promised to review the surveillance footage. But Nick saw the hesitation. The skepticism. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, the paranoia that comes with incarceration, or maybe Chance simply didn't want to believe there was a deeper conspiracy underfoot. But Nick knew. He had seen those eyes before. And whoever that man was, he wasn't just a killer. He was orchestrating something far bigger. Something calculated. Days bled into nights. The investigation unfolded slowly, agonizingly. Michael was working around the clock, but it felt like nothing moved. Every minute in that cell chipped away at Nick's resolve. He started replaying every conversation he'd had with Damien in his head. Were there signs he missed? Enemies he didn't know about? Could this be related to some old rivalry he wasn't aware of? The more he thought, the more the walls pressed in. He wasn't just losing sleep. He was losing clarity. And outside that cell, Lily's silence continued to be deafening. It was Michael who eventually brought news. Someone had tampered with the chain of custody regarding the knife. The gloves tested positive for DNA that didn't match Nick's. It was something, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not enough to prove innocence, only to stir more questions. The DA wasn't backing down, and Chance seemed stuck between duty and doubt. Nick felt like a marionette in someone else's play, strings being pulled by an unseen hand. The masked man haunted his thoughts. Who would go to such lengths to frame him? Who would risk breaking into his home, plant evidence, kill a man, and then taunt him in jail? It wasn't just personal. It was psychological warfare. And as much as Nick wanted to believe justice would prevail, a gnawing dread took root. What if no one ever believed him? What if this was his new reality? Yet deep beneath the dread was a spark. A sliver of fire that refused to die. Whoever that man was, he had made one mistake. He had shown himself. He had looked Nick in the eye. And Nick would never forget those eyes. Somewhere, somehow, he would find the truth. He had to. Because this wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about dismantling the monster who thought he could destroy lives from the shadows. Let me know if you'd like me to continue the next chapter where Nick starts investigating the masked man's identity from within jail, or if you want to pivot to Lily's point of view as she battles with doubt and heartbreak. Nick sat in his cell, shoulders heavy with the weight of accusations that felt like chains far more crushing than the iron bars confining him. Days had passed since the masked figure appeared outside his cell door, and the memory still burned in his mind like an open wound. He knew what he saw. Those eyes. That calculated tilt of the head. The smugness that radiated without a single word spoken. It wasn't a random killer. This was someone playing a game, a long con built on precision and patience. And in that silent exchange, Nick understood a truth that chilled him to the core. This wasn't about Damien. This was about him. Someone had orchestrated a trap so flawless, so deliberate, that every shred of evidence now screamed his guilt. And why? Because Nick was vulnerable. His reputation had cracks now. After the chaos of past months, personal failures, strained relationships. People weren't so quick to believe in his integrity anymore. That trust, once ironclad, had eroded. And whoever was behind this had weaponized that vulnerability into a weapon that could destroy him completely. But why Nick? The question echoed endlessly in his mind until the answer clawed its way from the shadows of his thoughts. Because he was the opposite of what they wanted him to appear to be. Nick had spent his life helping others, stepping into the fire to pull people out. He wasn't perfect, but he was steadfast, a man who carried burdens that weren't his because no one else would. To brand someone like that as a killer wasn't just character assassination, it was psychological annihilation. And it was working. The press had begun whispering, the online chatter was relentless, and even people he loved were faltering in their certainty. Lily. Her doubt cut deepest of all. He saw it in her eyes during that brief visit. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just hesitation. The silent killer of trust. Outside the cell, the world churned with its own storms. At Crimson Lights, Lily sat in a corner booth with Audra, their hushed voices blending with the ambient clatter of mugs and murmurs of patrons. The weight of Damien's death hung heavy between them, a pall of grief and confusion neither could shake. For Lily, it was more than shock, it was guilt. She had chosen Damien in ways she couldn't fully admit even to herself, and now he was gone, his absence an accusation she couldn't answer. But worse than that was the gnawing question of Nick. Could he have done this? Logic said no. History said no. Yet evidence said otherwise. And evidence doesn't lie. Or does it? That thought came unbidden and unwanted, whispering at the edges of her conscience. Audra, ever the pragmatic observer, was less conflicted. If the police have that much on him, she murmured, then maybe Nick isn't the man we thought he was. Lily flinched at the words, but she didn't argue. Not because she agreed, but because doubt had already taken root, and voicing protest felt like betraying the gnawing fear inside her. They didn't know that their uneasy alliance over coffee was nothing more than a calm before a storm, one that would rip through their lives with devastating force. Across town, in the Newman office, Victor sat behind his desk, his steely gaze fixed on Chance as the younger man laid out the details of the case. Evidence, timeline, witness statements, all pointing to Nick. But Victor wasn't a man who bent to the illusions of surface truths. He saw angles others missed. And something about this stank of orchestration. Find the cracks, he ordered, his voice a gravelly rumble of controlled fury. Because this doesn't add up. My son may have his flaws, but murder? No. Someone is playing us, and I want to know who. Chance nodded, jaw tight. He wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but part of him agreed. The pieces fit too perfectly, like a puzzle arranged by an unseen hand. And in his world, perfection was the fingerprint of deceit. That same afternoon, Chance and Victor sat across from Carter in the interrogation room, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows over the polished metal table. Carter shifted in his seat, his usual composure fraying at the edges under the weight of their scrutiny. Chance leaned forward, voice calm but edged with steel. Where were you the night Damien died? Carter gave a clipped answer, but it wasn't enough. Victor's eyes bored into him, unblinking, a predator's patience radiating from every fiber of his being. They pressed harder, questions layered like traps within traps, but Carter danced around them, his evasions smooth, almost rehearsed. Yet in the flicker of his gaze, in the tightening of his jaw, both men saw it, the shadow of a lie. They didn't have proof. Not yet. But they had a scent, and neither Victor nor Chance was about to let it go cold. Meanwhile, across town, another drama unfolded in hushed tones and razor-edged glances. Amanda Sinclair stood in the doorway of Cain Ashby's office, her silhouette framed by the dim glow of the desk lamp. He hadn't heard her enter. Too consumed by the glow of the security monitor flickering before him. On the screen, snippets of footage played in jerky loops, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with the urgency of a man erasing ghosts. Amanda's voice, cool and measured, sliced through the tension. Working late, Cain? He froze, just for a fraction of a second, before spinning in his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just tying up loose ends, he said lightly. But Amanda wasn't buying it. Her eyes, sharp as glass, swept over the monitor, catching the unmistakable flash of a timestamp, the stutter of a clip mid-delete. Something twisted in her gut, a cold, coiling suspicion that threatened to steal her breath. For days, whispers had gnawed at the edges of her certainty. Now, staring at Cain in that dimly lit office, those whispers roared into clarity. He was hiding something. And it wasn't minor. Her instincts, honed by years in courtrooms and battlefields of law, screamed the truth she didn't want to face. Cain wasn't just cleaning up files. He was burying evidence. Evidence tied to Damien. Evidence that could shatter lives. Evidence that might explain why Nick Newman was rotting in a cell for a crime Amanda was no longer sure he committed. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor like gunshots in the silence. Cain watched her, his smile sharpening into something predatory. "You know what's funny," he said softly, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who thrived on confrontation. "I was just about to ask you the same thing." The words hung between them, heavy with implication, a gauntlet thrown in a game neither could afford to lose. Because now, Amanda wasn't just a lawyer fighting for her client's life. She was a woman staring into the abyss of betrayal, teetering on the edge of a truth that could burn everything to ash. Outside those walls, the storm gathered strength. Lily and Audra were about to learn secrets that would shatter their illusions, tearing the fragile fabric of trust thread by thread. Chance and Victor, relentless in their pursuit, would dig deeper into Carter's lies, unearthing connections darker than anyone imagined. And Cain, smooth, charming, serpentine Cain, would weave his web tighter, pulling Amanda into a deadly dance of accusation and counteraccusation, even as the real question loomed like a specter over them all. Who killed Damien? Who framed Nick? And how far would each of them go to protect the truths they held, and the lies they couldn't afford to expose?